You know, if there were one right way to hit, and if everyone knew what that way was and applied himself to learn it, then what would happen? The kids who have the most natural advantages would be the ones to excel. You're not going to be any larger than 5'8" or 5'9", and you learned to the max the way that hitting is taught today. You're nevertheless going to be at a disadvantage against kids who are 6'2" and 6'3". I say in another video that I've made that basically one of the axes along which the swing can be analyzed is drive hitting, where the backside, the top hand, is generating power, versus drag hitting, where you have a big leg lift, a leg kick. The bottom hand is really throwing down on the ball, and the latter is the preferred method now because of these light metal bats and the wooden models that have been made to resemble the metal bat ever since Tony Gwynn. He was the first one that I heard say that he actually chose his wooden bat to replicate his metal version that he used as a kid. Well, these bats can be held up here, and guys like to lift their elbow up so that they can drive down on the ball when their swing is descending. But the top hand comes off very early, and there's a big kick that usually goes with that, because you're really starting your front side moving, and the back side, the top hand has to pretty much give up and get off the bat right after contact. Now, that's what I say is a swing that's to the advantage of a tall kid. If you have a couple extra inches on your legs and a couple extra inches on your reach, then that's just that much more power that you can generate as you try to put backspin on that incoming pitch. What about the rest of us? I don't think there's nearly enough analysis of old school in hitting these days. Everybody assumes that old-timers were hitting inferior pitching, and whatever success they had in their time is irrelevant now because pitching is so much better. Guys are in such better shape. I'm going to try to suggest a technique that Negro leaguers used to use, and before them, guys in the dead ball era. Actually, the Negro leagues were a good place to find little clues about what was going on in white baseball 20 or 30 years earlier. And I call this level and lever. The bottom hand in this swing, with the bottom hand I'm going to level the bat off first of all, and then I'm going to lever it back. I'm actually pulling the bat head forward as I pull the handle back, and that assists the top hand to drive on through. These two hands are actually working against each other in a sense. This one, it can't go directly back because that's physically impossible. Once it levels the bat off, it starts to curl back this way, and so the vector of this bottom hand is essentially going in reverse of my top hand that's driving through. The vectors are working in opposite directions, but the two hands, of course, are working together to generate bat speed. You may have noticed, too, that I've got my hand spread here. Very old school. And you just about can't do it with a metal bat. This is a 34, and this is as long as they get. Why am I trying so hard to get my top hand, my backside here, to drive through? Well, because this is a more level swing than the pulling down on the bat from above with the cocked elbow and everything, the A-rod swing. This is a much more old-fashioned kind of swing. I think Willie Mays used a lot of these elements. He may have had his hand, a lot of those guys would spread their hands a little bit, especially if they gotten into a two-strike count, but I'm sure if you find the old photographs and look at their hands, you can tell that they've got, Ted Williams talks about this in his videos and in his book, actually. You have maybe one or two fingers here on the bottom that are really snug and tight. That does the leveling and the levering. And the top hand is, as Ted says, it's tight on the bat, but not pressing the handle into the palm.
Here's a little footage of our man Willie taking some BP, having some frustrating swings. But his hands are not really going back. They're just firing right from his back armpit, but his stride is carrying him forward.
Just a quick sidebar here on why it's important not to let the thumb go around the handle of the bat. I'm not sure that was ever explained to me, but think of a boxer. If you were to clench your fist tight and keep your wrist straight and try to throw punches, that not only wouldn't have much punch, you'd probably end up breaking your arms. You get the maximum effect, the most explosive effect, when you have your fingers loose and you have a curve in that wrist, and then there's a sort of a whiplash effect or something, I don't know, but it's a very explosive effect. Your fingers can still be kind of loose. I'm not doing a martial arts video here. I'm just saying that the action of the top hand is very analogous to that. I'm not sure what the fancy physiological word would be for it, but that's why you don't want that thumb around the bat. You don't want those fingers locked. You don't want that wrist straight as it's driving through. You want to, when driving down, you don't ever actually have the palm, the heel of that palm underneath the handle. It's on top of it, and then maybe it's kind of to the side. But when you're swinging off the shoulder with the hands down here at the armpit, and you're taking this punch with that backhand, you want that wrist curled. You don't want the thumb on the bat, or not very tightly at all. You want to be able to just fire off that back shoulder and have that wrist straighten out right at the point of contact. There's going to be a lot of explosive energy there, and the heel of that palm is going to be under the handle all the way through the zone. It's very, very important. You know, even if you're going to start up here, I think it's still important to get down with that palm, get that thing under the handle if you want to smooth out the swing and have that explosive extension. Some of these things I think are kind of negotiable, but not that. That top hand has to keep from clamping down and straightening the wrist and locking the thumb. You can't do that if you can have a level swing and an explosive follow through. I don't even like to have my thumb anywhere near the handle. So if I'm doing this, I'm staying inside the ball so perfectly that I'm almost going in a straight line, and that's what I want. And neither one of my hands, you may notice, is going back in the least. I don't want either this hand or this hand to move back. I'm swinging right off my back shoulder here. Level and lever and drive through. And of course the lever and the driving through of the top hand are virtually simultaneous, but my guess is that maybe the bottom hand starts to pull back, to lever back just a split second before the top hand drives through, because the top hand is still, my top hand is pretty loose while I'm flattening the bat, and then when the handle starts to come up, that's when I really throw my punch with my top hand. Now, you can't see what my feet are doing here, but I'm going to move the camera a little bit to try to bring that in. Okay, actually I'm doing a complete change of venue here, and I've got bright shoes on, I hope. I want to show you how logical it is if you're firing with your backside, if you're driving through with your top hand. It's much more logical to face around with your toes a little bit, like a sprinter who's about to leave the blocks, and get that front side completely out of the way. You don't have to try to hit over that leg. You just turn it out. I would just set up this way and point the toe toward the pitcher, and I would want the back toe pointed kind of toward the pitcher as well, and my back leg is actually kind of in a mild Z if you follow it up from the toes to the heel, which is turned back toward the catcher, and then my knees kind bent inward a little bit, and then my thigh and my hip, I'm shoving off of that back leg to drive my top hand through, and I'm just going to set up that way. Now, Ted Williams, of course, was the big advocate of throwing open that front side, and you can do that. You can certainly set up like this and then do a little turn when you load and then open up. But I certainly don't think that this opening up is helping the drive, as Ted would have said. I think maybe Ted had a bit of a misconception about that. Doing a big lift or a long stride or something, doing a whole lot with that front side so that it flies open is not really giving your swing any more drive unless your top hand is pulling down on the bat from over your shoulder, which you can't see me doing in this shot, but you can just imagine this kind of movement with my forward foot is going to help me to really pull my top hand down. I'm not doing that in this swing. I just want this front side out of the way so that I can drive right through. You know, if I'm a sprinter and I get the back foot here on the block, I'm not going to push myself into my front knee and fall on my face. I don't want to. I want the front to be open up so I can channel my thrust directly at the pitcher and drive that top hand on through. I need to break in here and say a few things about how guys 100 years ago hit, because the way I began this video was by saying that I was going to try to revive, to fish up some of those old strategies from newsreels and old pictures. Well, here we want to depart from what they were actually doing, because you got to remember, pitchers back then were into this big windmill windup. I call it a Bugs Bunny windup. If you've ever seen the old cartoons, it's, you know, the arm goes like this, and then you have the arms coming back, and then there's a lot of appendages for the hitter to try to look through in order to find the ball, and there's a lot of waiting that he has to do. And guys back then, in the teens of the 20th century, were apt to do the other things that I've talked about with the feet. Their toes, yes, would be facing toward the pitcher somewhat, certainly the front one, and I think probably the back one, often a little cocked. But they would do this. They would lift their front leg while dropping their back arm, their back hand, and that would create kind of a hitch. One goes up, the other comes down, and I think they are just sort of waiting for the pitcher to get through to all those gyrations and deliver the ball home. Most ages have a kind of swing that shadows what the pitcher's doing. I think every hitter really has to have his front foot down right after the pitcher gets his front foot down and he's about to release the ball. And that's why I say it's sort of a shadow effect. It's not a mirror effect. The hitter's motions are just a split second behind what the pitcher's doing. The pitcher drives forward. Well, that's when the hitter needs to shift his weight right, or an instant after that, and he has to be ready to fire away if he likes the pitch. But there's so much going on back in the, say, 1912 that hitters almost had to kind of do something to, I guess, wait on the pitcher to decide to let go of the ball. And Babe Ruth hit this way, even Ty Cobb. Ruth and Cobb are so often regarded as polar opposites, but they both did this. They had that extreme, Ruth even more than Cobb. He brought his front foot way back, and that's probably why he hit with so much more power. But they both dropped their hands, and they would come so far forward, and so many other hitters of their era did the same thing, that often the back foot would be completely off the ground, and the front foot, they would be straight up on their front leg when they let fly at the ball. Now, we don't want to obviously replicate that today in the 21st century, because we have guys who come set, and they're not even in the windup when there are no runners on base. A lot of pitchers just like to throw that way in all circumstances, and they're going to fire the ball long before we had time to do this. You can't do all this while the ball's in the air. That's why I would take that toes to the pitcher style and basically not have a stride at all. I'd just be ready to launch off the back foot. But even the guys, this is really the point. The guys who are doing this in 1910, they're still opening that front leg up. They're pointing those toes toward the pitcher so they can drive through powerfully and get right at the ball. They're backside hitters. They're drive hitters. I thought, honestly, that Ty Cobb was kind of an early incarnation of Charlie Lau when I was teaching my poor son how to hit. And I was just figuring it out myself. And I read what Ty said about his swing. It sounded like Ty really believed that he was primarily a bottom hand hitter. He liked to have his arm straight out, and he liked to get it away from his body. Of course, you can do that when you got that leg up, and he felt that it was that bottom hand, that front arm, that was doing all the work. But what this is doing, in fact, it's putting the bat, it's settling the bat into those, what Cal Ripken Jr. calls the knocker knuckles. And it's also making that top wrist bend. It's bending the wrist, and that is what you do when you want to drive into the ball and throw that punch and go right at it. Cobb was a drive hitter, just like Ruth. Everybody of that era practically was. I don't want to be too sweeping, but the ones that I've been able to study certainly look that way. All this stuff where I'm going to talk about a hitch in the second part of this video, but all those guys who had that little bit of a hitch, they were driving off the backside. In the 50s and even in the 40s, that sort of thing started to kind of fade into a glide, and that's where you get the Ted Williams load. Of course, even when you're doing that, notice that the top wrist is still bending. This is really, Stan Musial is just a modification of the Ty Cobb approach, in that he wants that bat to be strongly in the top hand. He wants it settled into those fingers, and he wants that wrist to bend, and then he's going to go right into the ball. And it's not hard to find shots of Stan actually off his back foot a little bit. All of these guys, though, again, not to harp on it too much, but their toe is pointed toward the pitcher when they're ready to drive at the ball. They're opening up the front side so they can create that power channel and drive on through.
Here's Napoleon Lajoie. What I like about this old photograph, it shows the top finger, again, somewhat coming off the bat. He's got not squeezing the bat real hard with his index and his thumb, but that's another one of those thick-handled bats. If you follow down to his feet, this is a very characteristic stance in the early years of the 20th century, with the forward foot simply pointing out toward the pitcher. And actually, it seems to me that the back foot is a little bit angled toward the pitcher as well. Honus Wagner. And he's probably not fully gathered into his position of waiting for the pitch, but again, it looks as though his feet are somewhat, certainly the forward one, somewhat angled toward the pitcher, and probably can't make it out in this picture, but his hands are certainly spread. And then down here we have someone by the name of Elmer Flick, who's in the Hall of Fame. I'm not even particularly familiar with Elmer, but he too has the characteristic position. I don't know that he's would assume this position in the batter's box, but I wouldn't be surprised if it wouldn't be far from this. Again, the toes pointed forward and the slight spread of the hands. Of course, a lot of choking up on the thick-handled bat. And the top fingers are relatively loose. I want to level that bat off. This is my bottom hand, my little pinky especially. I like it on the knob here. I've got it leveled off, and then I'm levering back, and bam, I'm punching with the top hand. And because I've got this 34-inch bat, it gives me some
extra purchase to have that spread of the hands. Again, I know this is a very outdated method, but physically, doesn't it make perfect sense? If you got this top hand closer to the barrel, then it's the same as if it were a shorter bat. You're not losing any bat speed just because you've got a longer bat, because this hand may even be closer to the barrel than if this were a 32. Contrary to what some coaches have said in my hearing, this isn't going to create a bump in the swing because I don't have these fingers, I don't have my thumb wrapped around the bottom of the bat. I'm basically just exerting pressure, a lot of pressure, with my pinky. So I've got a lot of flex there, a lot of open space, and that top hand is gonna, since it's spread a little bit, it's farther toward the barrel, it's really gonna generate a lot of bat speed, the two hands working together.
There's an excellent shot of Leon Wagner from a 1962 baseball card showing the spread of his hands, and you can even see that the pointer of his bottom hand is very loose on the bat, so is the thumb, while on the top hand you can see how the heel of the palm has sort of come around toward the front, showing that his wrist is bent and that he's really got the handle of the bat in those knuckles. So Leon is definitely modeling a technique that had been in use for decades, especially in the Negro Leagues and in earlier baseball, white baseball before the 50s. This is a photo of the late Hall of Famer George Kell, and George was not a power hitter by any means, but he was certainly not only a former batter. He beat Ted Williams out of a batting title once. He was a batting champ. He led in hits several times, and he had an incredibly low strikeout rate. You can tell from this photograph not only that his hands are separated about an inch, and I'm proud to say that he actually confirmed that to me in a letter that he wrote a couple of years before his death, that was one of his strategies that he used to make contact. But you can also tell that this is a very thick-handled bat, so the top thumb is gathered around the handle, as it almost has to be, because that's a pretty thick hunk of wood. And here's another photo where he's posing with the bat in not quite so obvious position in terms of the spread hands, but you can tell that the pointer, the index finger of the bottom hand, is quite loose, and actually it looks to me as though the index and the thumb of the top hand are quite loose. So he's got that ability there again to swing right at the ball and follow through with the high finish, which was so common in the great hitters of yesteryear.
And maybe you don't like that, or maybe it's just, it seems too flaky and far out for you, but you'd better think of something if you're small, because again, you're not going to be able to beat the big guys playing their own game. I'm a nobody in terms of past performance, or in terms of am I a professional coach? No, I'm not even that. I'm a professional historian. I love to look back into things. I love to dig up old photos and newsreels and such things. And I believe in the intelligence of the people who preceded us, and I believe in studying what they did and learning from them. If you don't feel that that's a worthwhile project, if you just want to fit in and be cool and look like everybody else, then I hope you've got the physique to go with it. But if you need to find an edge, if you have to beat the crowd because Mother Nature didn't give you what you need to be a standout, if you got to think of some way to do it up here, it doesn't really matter who I am. It doesn't matter what my credentials are. Listen to what I'm saying. If it makes sense to you, try it, test it out, and see if it works. if the hands are working for you in the proper fashion, then I truly think everything else will fall into place. Rod Carew said that the hands are the most important part of hitting, and he should know. Maybe he's not our ideal as a power hitter, but we're talking about little guys here. We're talking about get-on-base guys that might lead in on-base percentage, guys that are going to be hanging around on base so that the big guys can drive us in and win their RBI titles. Teams don't win without little guys finding a way to get on base. And what I'm telling you is a way not to strike out, a way not to hit pop-ups, a way to hit low-line drives, and with that low trajectory, if you're getting the barrel on the ball, a lot of those are going to get through, and you're going to get on base. That's how you win.